Good afternoon, Austin. How you doing, buddy?
Good, Dad. How are you?
Good. I'm excited for our guest today, Austin. We're going to go back to when I was growing up, and you're going to get to meet someone finally that you've heard me talk about, a legend in college football. But today, our journey takes us inside the heart and mind of college football royalty. Our guest played for Bear Bryant. He coached alongside Bear Bryant, Frank Broyles, Johnny Majors, and coached some of the best players to ever play the game. In a profession where the trademark of success is defined by achievement, our guest has reached the pinnacle with titles as national champion, coach of the year, and Hall of Fame coach. But this story is about the heart of a player's coach, one built on relationships. My name is Ken Karcher, and I'll be your host. Alongside me is my son, Austin Karcher. And today, we'd like to welcome Coach Jackie Sherrill as our guest to Awaken Kingdom Culture, where hearts and minds come alive, one story at a time. Hi, Coach. How are you?
Doing good, thank you. How are you guys? I know that you got to be at separate places. So, Ken, where are you?
I am in Coleman, Alabama, and I live next door to one of my children, my daughter, and then my son Austin, who's with us. He lives in Mobile, Alabama, about 5 hours south. So,
Yes, that Alabama is kind of narrow, so from top to bottom, it's a pretty good jaunt. Yeah, yeah,
yeah. I have another son that lives in Tuscaloosa, so we're trying to cover the state of Alabama. But
right.
so, Coach, let's jump right in, and if you would be kind enough, just tell us a little about how would you describe growing up as a kid in the Sherrill home? Where did you grow up, and tell us about your parents, siblings, etc.
Well, I was going back tracing the Sherrill family, meaning back years and years ago. They all came over. One group went to Connecticut, the other group went to North Carolina. There's a cemetery I got to go visit with my nephew. It's Sherrill Cemetery in Sherrill Forge, North Carolina. And my ancestor, way back, was the first pioneer that actually crossed the river and settled on the west side of the river in North Carolina.
Wow.
Fast forward, the Sherrill family moved on down to Tennessee, to Mississippi, Alabama, and my father was working for Halliburton Oil Well Cementing Company, which started in Duncan, Oklahoma. He was the foreman of the shop, and at that time, and born in '00. My mother was born in '04, and there were eight kids. I was four girls, four boys. I was the baby of the kids, and so growing up in Duncan, had the opportunity to, in a small town, had the opportunity to play all sports, and we all look about, where's our identity. We all gravitated to where we're accepted, and having an opportunity to play sports, you know, accepted me. And I'm not saying I was that good, but I wasn't bad either. And had the opportunity to play football, basketball, baseball, and moved up in the summer of my ninth, 10th grade. I moved to Biloxi, Mississippi, and played in Biloxi, Mississippi. And uh, my in my senior year, being recruited at that time in Mississippi, Mississippi State, LSU, Georgia Tech, Alabama, Tulane. But I grew up when Oklahoma was going through their era of 48 winning games in
Hmm.
in a row,
Yeah.
and they went to Notre Dame and got beat at Notre Dame, so that broke the 48 game winning streak. And I was going to OU because, when you grew up at that time, you didn't have the TV like you, and so you listened to the radio, and every Saturday it was Oklahoma football, nothing else. And so I was going to OU. Back then, you had the SEC, ACC had a joint venture where They had an early signing date in December. The national signing date was in May, but an early signing date. Once you signed with one of the schools, then you couldn't. The rest of them were uh, could not contact you or try to sign you. But when I signed with Alabama, then Oklahoma still recruited me. And matter of fact, I was going to go to Oklahoma for a visit before the national letter, but I changed my mind because I wasn't going there. And I thought if I went for a visit, then the coaches at Alabama may think I wasn't that sold on going to Alabama. But you know, you've been on the recruiting trails. You've been in a lot of recruiting, but Coach Bryant is the reason I went to Alabama. He came. They were playing in the Sugar Bowl. They came to Biloxi to view all the or look at all the facilities, the high school stadium, the locker room, and we spent about an hour and a half, 2 hours together, and he never asked me to come. And that was much different than everybody else. But he just talked about Alabama, talked about the players, but didn't ask me to come. So on the official visit, he had evidently the wrong recruiting uh, report because he put me with a kid from Texas, and this was homecoming weekend now, sororities, fraternities, and he took me bowling. So after a while, I said, you know, I'm tired. Let's go back. He did, took me to the hotel, and then I had another teammate that was on the visit, and we took off and went to the sorority and fraternity houses, just walking around trying to see what's going on. And then Coach Brian on Sunday morning took me to church. I was the only player that he took to church. So
Hmm.
he either was trying to tell me something or he understood that I was
Coach, when you look back to your growing up years at home, who would you say had the most influence in your life growing up?
well, probably as we all know, the most influence would be your coaches or one of the teachers. You know, I've always said as a coach, your responsibility is to make you're not your player's friend. You wasn't your son's friend growing up. You are now, but there's plenty of times when you said no. And there's plenty of times when Austin probably wasn't very happy with you. But
Yes.
being players and coaches, you know, I would tell players all the time, "I'm not your friend," and for them to understand, I'm your coach.
Hmm.
Same thing as a parent. So Coach Bryant I learned a lot. You know, I had the opportunity to play and coach for Coach Bryant, and then coach for Coach Broyles, and then coach for Coach Majors. So, you know, I had three great mentors, but real quickly, you know, Coach Bryant was a man's man. Anything you wanted in a man or want, he is. You know, he's very large, 6'4", uh, huge, and but also very compassionate. He has done things for people that people when no one would ever know. Coach Broyles was probably the best business guy at that time in the business. He was able to do a lot of things at Arkansas facilities way before other universities didn't have that kind of facilities. And then Coach Majors is probably the best PR guy. You know, he can meet you 14 years later. He could tell you where he met you, what y'all talked about, and probably what you were wearing. But you know, having an opportunity to coach for all of them certainly molded and helped me in my coaching career.
Hmm. Coach, when you were a young kid and maybe even in high school, did you have what were your dreams? And then was there any specific heroes you looked up to?
Well, at that time, you know, LSU was really big. You know, Canning was, you know, one of the top players in the country. But, you know, Mississippi was great too. You know,
Hmm.
I used to really marvel. when I would see Crispino and other guys, how big they were. The players back then for Mississippi and LSU were not small. They were really big players. And you had Mississippi, LSU, Alabama, Auburn, of course, Tennessee, Florida, almost the same teams that you have now that were really outstanding. And Coach Bryant never would play Mississippi or LSU because that meant one of us would lose. The four bowl games were the Sugar, the Orange, the Cotton, and the Rose. So we couldn't go to the Rose. So you had three big major. So one of us would be kicked out of one of the major bowls. So I think that, and I'm not saying this because I know, I believe that Coach Bryant had a agreement with LSU and with Mississippi of not playing, so one of them would get into the major bowls, or two of them.
Now, Coach, when you were in high school, what specific? I mean, obviously, you said that you weren't that good an athlete, but then you named all the schools that you were recruited by, and I said you must have been a really good athlete. What position did you play? And tell us a little bit about your high school career and any famous high school memories or favorite high school memories that you have.
Well, we were in high school, Biloxi. You were in the South Big Eight, North Big Eight. Mississippi per capita at one time put more players in pro ball than any other state. And back then, Mississippi, and even today, if you could take every player out of the state of Mississippi, a good football team. But back then, you had the South Big Eight, North Big Eight, and Pascagoula, Biloxi, Gulfport, Macomb, and on up Moss Point, Pascagoula. So that was in the south. Then you started Meridian and Jackson and Tupelo. Yazoo City was in the North Big Eight, but it was outstanding football. And every year, one of the persons in Biloxi started the Shrimp Bowl. And so we got to play in a bowl game every year in our hometown. In the high school team, my sophomore year, I think there were 18 players that went off and played junior college or college football.
Wow.
Recruited by, LSU, Georgia Tech, Alabama, all of the schools that around Mississippi.
Wow. Coach, when you were at Alabama, I read this, and tell me if this is true. Did you actually play 7 different positions?
Yes. I went there as a fullback linebacker. As you know, back then you had to play both ways. So Leroy was a senior center linebacker, Jordan. And when he left, they tried to make me a center. And my arms were long enough, but my legs wasn't as long as my arms. So, so I played my sophomore year. I played fullback linebacker, but could have played center. We couldn't play as freshmen, as you know, but we had a freshman 4 games as freshmen, and my Coach Stallings was the defensive coordinator and basically was the coach. But and then my junior year, I could have played practice, could have played tight end, defensive end, nose guard, linebacker, offensive guard, and fullback or tailback. I played fullback and tailback my sophomore year. And my junior year, we lose our 2 tight ends during camp. And I'm in my room. Coach Bryant never would come into the players' rooms. That never did. And all of a sudden, here he is walking through the door. I'm scrambling, trying to. And he looked at me. He says, "Can you play tight end?" I said, "Yes, sir. I'll try." And he looked at me. He says, "I know you'll try. I want to know if you can play the damn thing or not." I wasn't going to tell him no. I said, yes, sir, I could play. So I started, that was against Georgia. We were playing them at home. And so Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, they got me ready to play tight end. So I played basically from that time tight end and linebacker
Hmm.
that year.
Wow.
Coach, what made Alabama so special? Obviously, you guys won 2 national championships, but what was? I mean, take us a little bit inside of that program and what made it so unique and special.
Well, it was Coach Bryant.
Hmm.
No question. There were 67. Some of our players said there were 76, but there were 67 in our freshman class.
Hmm.
And there were 7 of us that were in the picture our senior year. And so 7 out of 67 made it. Now we had, I think, 4 red shirts, so it's 11 out of 67.
Hmm.
Coach Bryant, they always talk about Coach Stallings going to Junction, and I said, Coach Stallings, you only had Coach Bryant. I had Coach Bryant and you.
uh, what do you have a memorable conversation with Coach Bryant, other than the one that he came into your dorm room?
Well, my sophomore year, this is a side note, and Ken understands. My sophomore year, President Kennedy was assassinated. We were going to play Miami, George Meyer. At that time, George Meyer was the number 1 quarterback throwing in the country. So we were going to play Miami. President Kennedy was assassinated, so we canceled the game. And side story, Joe and about 6 other players broke curfew.
Hmm.
Curfew is, we even had it when we didn't have a game. But anyway, broke curfew. They went to a hamburger joint, and somehow the owner got upset, called Coach Bryant, and Coach Bryant removed Joe from the team. And so
Hmm.
we had 3 games
Wow.
left. We had Auburn, we had uh, Miami, and then we had the bowl game, which we played Mississippi. And so he removed Joe from the team, and uh, he asked him one question, Joe, were you drinking? And Joe wasn't going to tell a lie, and he said, yes, sir. So it took a vote on the staff, and every coach wanted Joe to stay or be on the team, except for Coach Stallings. Coach Stallings was the only one that said no, he doesn't. So we played our last 3 games with Steve Sloan as our quarterback, and Namath didn't, but he came back next year.
Hmm.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
won.
Joe Namath makes a little bit of difference, I would think. Steve Sloan's a good guy though too. So, Coach, as you finish up your college career, did you have any NFL aspirations or opportunities? And then, how did you get your start in coaching?
Well, I had Coach Bryant called me in, and he said that he had 2 opportunities for me, both free agents. One, I could sign with the Canadian team or go as a free agent. And I just had gotten married, had a little girl. So I said, Coach, I'm finishing my master's and going into the business world. And so I declined. Probably, a lot of second thoughts, say, well, should have tried, but you could have, could have, should have, whatever. But I asked Coach Bryant to call Coach Broyles. I stayed 1 year as a GA and
Hmm.
working on my master's. Asked Coach Bryant if he would call Coach Broyles about going there and finishing it. And how that happened, Bobby Roper, which played for Arkansas, was all Southwest Conference. He came and we were roommates that year that I was a GA. So I just thought, well, I'll just go to Arkansas and finish it. And anyway, I remember I met Coach Bryant walking into his office, and I said, Coach, would you call Coach Broyles for me? And he looked at me and says, you have a job? I said, no, sir, I'm going there as the GA. never said another word because he wasn't very happy that I was leaving Alabama and going to go to Arkansas as the same position as the GA. But he walked in and told Coach Bailey to call uh, Coach Broyles and tell him to hire me. So that's how I got. And then when I was at Arkansas, still I was not going into coaching. And Coach uh, Majors got the job at Iowa State. And at that time, married, have a little kid. So I said, you know, walked in and said, Coach, you have a job for me. And he looked at me and he said, what can you coach? And I said, Coach, if you're a coach, you can coach any position. He looked at me and what the hell do you know, young man? But anyway, he hired me and I went there as a B team coach. Back then, you had a B team that you had played games. And then we're playing. Larry Lacewell was the defensive coordinator. Jimmy Johnson was the defensive line coach, and Larry coached linebackers. And we're playing BYU, and Larry came to me and asked me if I would coach the linebackers. I said yes, and just so happened, the linebacker intercepted two passes, and we beat BYU. So he moved me to linebacker coach. So I coached the rest of the year. He leaves, so I became. Um, that time Larry left. Jimmy became the defensive coordinator, and I was the linebacker coach. The next year, Jimmy leaves, and then I was the linebacker coach and coordinator. And then the next year, coach puts me as assistant head coach.
Hmm.
So he moved me up very quickly.
Then I think that's the time you all get the call, or Coach Majors gets the call, and you all come to Pittsburgh. Is that right?
Yes, we were playing in the Liberty Bowl, playing Georgia Tech. As a matter of fact, Steve Sloan was the head coach, and uh, so Coach Majors accepts the job at Pittsburgh, but he didn't go visit. He actually sent his brother to
Joe.
visit
Yeah.
Pittsburgh. Yeah, visit Pittsburgh and see if that was going to be a fit for him or have a chance to be successful. So he sent me up there to set everything up. And I remember getting off the airplane at Pittsburgh National, driving to the Oakland. And when you're going down, and of course, you go through Fort Pitt tunnel. And I'm looking at all the trees, there were no leaves. I thought, they're dead. My impression was, you know, here we are driving from Pittsburgh Airport to Pitt, and all the trees are dead. Yeah, that, that stuck with me for a long time.
So, Coach, you're at Pitt, I think, for what, 2 or 3 years, and then you get a call to get your first head coaching job. Was it tough to leave Pitt, or did you feel you just needed to get that opportunity?
Well, we all want to be a head coach, and so after 3 years, I get a go interview for the job at Washington State. They gave me the job, and the deal was I would take the job. I'm going to finish in the Sun Bowl, but if it became public, I wouldn't come. And they held it quiet for a whole month. No one knew that I accepted the job other than Coach Majors. And we told the staff, or he did, the morning of the Sun Bowl, and then we told the players after the game. And the two players, the player it was hard to meet with was Tony Dorsett because I had recruited Tony and told Tony I'd be there for 4 years for him.
Coach, you mentioned, I know Austin's got a question in a second, but you mentioned Dorsett. I was going to get to that a little bit more later, but I want to bring it up now. Tell us that recruiting story. I've heard many times. I've heard you tell it on some things. Wasn't that pretty unique? You were the main recruiter, were you not?
Yes, I recruited Tony. Matter of fact, I was at Hopewell High School, and so many times that well, my first visit, I mean, they turned a janitor room into a meeting room for the coaches. They had three players, Ed Willamoski, Tony, and another player that a linebacker that went to Cincinnati. I should have recruited him because he was really a good player. But so it turned a janitor room into a meeting room so the coaches could meet Tony and Ed and the other kid. Uh, I was my turn, so I went in, sat down, and the door flew open. And the guy walks in and he says, "Who are you?" And I said, who I was. He says, "Where are you from?" And I said, "From Pittsburgh." He says, "Get out." It was Mr. Waters, which was the high school principal, kicked me out of the high school because the previous staff had said Tony was too small to play college football. And and so I came back every day, Ken, every day. And all of a sudden, the principal, we became friends. I actually substituted sometimes, but I was there every day. And I remember when Coach Paterno came to run through the school, uh, and he walked in, and I'm standing by the coach's office. He walks up and he said, "Can I see Tony and Ed?" They were going to go visit Penn State that weekend. And I looked at my watch and I said, "Joe, I've been here all day. I have an appointment." And he said, "I'll only take 2 minutes. I won't take." I said, "Joe, I've been here all day. I've had an appointment." And he said, "Please, just 2 minutes." And I looked at him and I said, "Okay." So he meets with them, and it lasted 2 minutes. He walked out and put two fingers up, and I said, "Thank you." But in reality, I didn't have a meeting with Tony or.
Oh, that's hilarious. So you go to Washington State, you get your first job, and then you get called back to come back to Pitt. Um, and they were coming off a national championship. What was your approach going back, knowing the success they had, and you walking into that program?
Well, it was easy because I recruited most of the players and
Right.
coached them, and so being an assistant coach and a head coach is two different positions. And as an assistant coach, you're closer to the players that you coach at your job. And being a head coach, you have all the players. And I remember a great player, Bob Jerry, which ended up, uh, playing professionally, uh, came to me in my first spring back to Pitt as the head coach, and he said, "Coach, you've changed." And I looked at him. I said, "Bob, I'm the head coach. Before I only had you and the defensive players. Now I got everybody." And he looked at me. He says, "I understand." Turned around and walked off.
Hmm.
Well, Coach, that was when we encountered each other in 1981, and I got to tell you, and I'll admit it publicly, I should have went to Pitt. You happened to have a pretty good quarterback in a guy named Marino that scared me away. But looking back, should have probably done that, been with you instead of Notre Dame. But you had tons of great players: Marino, Covert, Green, Jackson, May, Grimm. Then you had a bunch of coaches that are, from your tree of Johnson and Wanstead, Fazio, Ferentz, I mean, you name it, it keeps going. What made Pitt special in those years? Obviously, great players, but what made it special, Coach?
Well, Pitt. If you go back in the history of Pitt, you're looking all the way back to Fordham. You're looking back to Lombardi's. I mean, Pitt at one time certainly was in the top three football programs in the country. And you look at the stadium and, realize that was built all the way back in the 20s. So,
Wow.
football was important to Pitt. You're all the way back. And, we got there in the previous 3 years, they were 1-10, 1-10, 1-10. They had won 3 games in 3 years. So the culture, it wasn't that they didn't have some players. They had some players, but the difference, the culture had to be changed. We all talk about culture today, but basically, what it is, you have to have the it takes seven things to build a program. One, the administration. They have to give you the tools to compete.
Hmm.
Then you look at the alumni, are they supporting? And at that time, there wasn't many people in Pitt Stadium. Then you look at the student body, would they support? And back there, and as we know, Pitt is a transit school. It's like the
Yeah.
University of Houston and other schools that are in major cities. It was a transit school, so you didn't have that many kids living on campus. Uh, then you go back and look at the coaches, the players, and then the media. And the media is so important. And I think one of the biggest pluses was when Pitt hired Coach Majors because he was a media darling. The media loved Coach Majors, and because he always had time for them anytime. So it takes those seven things, and Pitt made a commitment. Dr. Posvar made a commitment to Coach Majors to give him a chance. And me personally, I think behind closed doors, the administration said we're going to give it one more shot, and if we don't make it, then we're going to drop down to Carnegie Mellon and and play those that division of football. And
Hmm.
I believe they would have. But you changed the everything immediately. And the first game that gave credibility was we go and play Georgia at Athens, and they were lucky to tie the game. We tied the game and played very very well and had a great year. Went to a bowl game, Sun Bowl, and so that kind of flipped. And then recruiting became easier and easier. Uh, because I always felt on Tony that Tony's best friend was Ed Williamowski. And I always felt if we could get Ed to commit, sign, we would get Tony. And sure enough, Ed signed one morning and Tony signed that afternoon. But Tony was probably the one player. Now, we had some other great players, but there wasn't any player like Tony.
Hmm.
My Tony Dorsett story, coach, is I used to watch him. I told him late in his career he left Dallas, came to Denver when I was a rookie in Denver, and I used to tease him. I'd say, Tony, I used to watch you when I was in my diapers at Pitt. Now I'm handing the ball off to you. That's how old you are, Tony. But even at 35, that guy could run. Wow, he was good.
He'll run. The first time I saw him run, he was in Pitt, the old gym at Pitt, and they had a track. But when you ran the 50, you would hit the wall because you didn't have time to slow down or distance. And so the very first race that I saw Tony, he jumped. So they marked him. So he sat in the blocks, and when they took off, he was probably 8 to 10 yards behind, and he passed them just like they were in slow motion. And I said, "Yeah, he can run." And I took Bobby had film on Tony, and Tony in this film ran the kickoff back, ran a punt back. I mean, doing all kinds of things. And I told Bobby Roper, I said, Bobby, I need your help. I've got a kid that's really a great player, but he's just awful small. I can't make a decision on him. Of course, I'd already made that decision, recruiting like crazy. And so I'm turning the film on. All of a sudden, he sees Tony play, and he flips it off and turns to me and starts cussing me because he knew I'd set him up. And same thing with Jones. He was played for Philadelphia out of Arkansas, running back, and I took him to the basketball game, and I said, I don't know about him. He's awful small, doesn't weigh about 150 pounds. And so we walk into the gym, and Tony had just gone up and stuffed the ball. And, and he starts laughing at me again. He said, "Yeah, you got me on that one too." But Tony could do, yeah, and they called him Hawk because of his eyes, but he had
Yes.
such great peripheral vision, and that he could see things others couldn't see when he had the ball. We're playing
Wow.
Notre Dame, and he ran for 303 yards, but they ran a draw. He's at tailback. They ran a draw. They're playing halves of the field, so they 12 yards deep, and so they start backing up two safeties. He split the safeties before they could close them.
Oh,
But
wow.
he could fly.
Wow. So,
I,
Coach,
I don't know if he was ever officially timed. I think he was by Dallas, but he ran a 4.2 back then. He would have, you know,
wow.
Yeah.
Coach, fast forward a little bit. You end up leaving Pitt. Can you describe your process and thoughts and emotions when you left Pitt?
well, we go play. That's when they went to the Sugar Bowl and won the national championship against Georgia. Uh, I was hired, and uh, we had great success. And towards the end, we go to the Sugar Bowl, and during the trip, we stayed in Biloxi, and that was my hometown. So a lot of my former players and people did things for our team that you know wouldn't have been done before. One of my teammates was in the lumber company, so he actually came in and spruced up the locker room so our players would be able to hang their clothes and for practice. And uh, so the administration uh, was kind of moving, and I wanted to have a meeting, and so I just thought I had the opportunity to go to A&M as the AD and head coach. So I took the opportunity to be a head coach in the AD, and the one I really, if I had stayed, and of course if in buts, but if I'd stayed, I really felt we would have won it all with Danny's senior year at Pitt.
Hmm. Hmm. Uh, Looking back, what was your fondest memory of your time at Pitt?
Well, the first time going and beating Penn State at Penn State,
Hmm.
that
Awesome.
was probably
That's a big win.
for all those years. I mean, it's kind of like Michigan, Ohio State, A&M, Texas, Mississippi State, Alabama, Auburn. But at that time, Penn State had uh, mostly controlled Pitt. So that was a big deal to go into Beaver Stadium and beat Penn State.
Hmm. Awesome.
Coach, I don't know if a lot of people know this, but I think during your time at Pitt, you started something there that was dear to your heart, and you started working a lot with Children's Hospital, didn't you?
Well, I have no idea, Ken, why uh, I took our team and said we're going to go down and visit. Pitt's you have the hospital, you have the Children's Hospital Dental School, but I said we'll go down and visit the Children's Hospital. So when you went in, you had kids, 5, 6, 7 years old that leukemia or cancer or different things that would have IVs or tubes in them. And, you know, we in the athletic world, you're spending time on the field and coaching the best athletes you could have. And so I had never spent time in a hospital with kids that, couldn't do things that were handicapped. So it really helped, our team. But there was one young man that 7 years old that really caught a relationship. We started talking and kept talking. So I invited him. We're opening with Notre Dame, and I invited him to be the guest, to be on the sideline for the Notre Dame game. And so that spring, it had to be like May, I guess. And this went to visit in February. It had to be in May. That I got a letter that said, how excited they were, the students, how excited this young man was. Unexpected things happened, and he passed away. Well, I go in the bathroom and take time to get out, but that's when I took my summer and went to Scottish Rite hospitals from, you know, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia to Kansas to Louisiana to Texas to Washington, and ended up in Hawaii. And I remember each place the first time. It took me 4 times to go in and out because emotionally I wasn't handling it very well. But then I realized they wanted your love and understanding. They did not want your sympathy. So from that on, it helped me how to talk to the kids and be able to do things. So I took them little footballs, took them T-shirts, took them hats, and we're in Hawaii, and we're in a big auditorium, and a little kid, 7 years old, was on a T-bar, had no lower extremities, so he's moving himself around on a T-bar. So he came up, I gave him a little football, put the bill of the hat, flipped it back, and he's batting the ball from one side to the other, chasing it. And I'm thinking, here I am, got all these problems, meaning I don't want to be here. Season starting, I want to get back. And then I compared it to that little kid. I said, I don't have any problems.
Great heart, Coach. Great heart.
But it's rewarding to be able to spend the time. And here at A&M, we're started the 12th man kickoff team, and what that is kids out of the student body that was a kickoff team, and they were good. They were number one in the nation, or in the top 5 for 5 years. Their average was 12.5. There's not a college team out there, major, that has a 12.5 yard average on kickoff coverage, and even today. And none passed the 30 until Bo Jackson ran one back to the 43-yard line in the Cotton Bowl, but none passed the 50, and they were really, really good. So we started a foundation. They give scholarships, given like 30 some odd scholarships to students at Texas A&M. We go to MDA, that's the cancer hospital in Houston, the real big one. And we're the only group that they allow to touch their cancer kids. So we put on a deal every year, a little fair where they play games, they have some food, we sign books and give them, hats, shirts, and other things. And this year we're going, I think we have it on May the 14th is this year, Wednesday. But still involved with doing things with kids.
That's awesome, Coach. Coach, you talked about going to Texas A&M. you become one of the highest paid coaches. Can you talk a little bit about your mindset and approach to the Texas A&M program? I gotta get my charger real quick. I'm sorry.
Well, like I said, they had players, and they just didn't know how to win, and that was the biggest thing is teaching the players how to win, and that's the way it is everywhere. Same thing, any program. Yeah, once the players learn how to win, it's awful hard to keep them from not winning. You know, players win, coaches don't. You know that, Ken. You know,
So, Coach, you're at A&M for I think 7 years, and then 8 years. You're there 8 years. You end up resigning in '88. Talk to us a little bit about the process and your thoughts that you went through with that situation.
well, I didn't have to leave, but when at that time, the media in Texas were after one thing, and what had happened in the old Southwest Conference was TCU, the coach at TCU, turned in SMU, but SMU thought it was Texas that turned them in. So you had two papers in Dallas. One paper broke the story on SMU. Some of the alumni wasn't very happy. So the other paper kind of went after everybody else, but their focus originally was going after Texas. And but everybody in the conference got uh, in instead of having it's the first time any sports department in the country that had hired investigating reporters, and so they actually went after every school, and they would go in the dumpster at night after they felt that trash was put in there, going through any paper they could find. Now it was awakening, and the NCAA did some things certainly to SMU they wish they hadn't, uh, and because it destroyed SMU for a period of time.
Hmm.
At this point in your career, I know you, I think, set out for 2 years. Did you know all along that you'd get back into coaching?
No, I started a car business. I bought into a dealership and go, wasn't really thinking about getting back in, and then get a call in Mississippi State, and the AD came down. We interviewed, and then he hired me. So got back in. They
Hmm.
had a good run, at Mississippi State. They were able to do things no one else had done. We ended up with again some outstanding players, and won the West. Went and played Tennessee, and I can honestly say if the stripes were a little more bearing on our side, we probably would have won it. But here, it was a great game, and Price at the end of the game, Price goes up, and our defensive backs there, and the ball was 2 inches. If he could have had his hand up 2 more inches, then Peerless wouldn't. But Peerless made a great catch and won the game for Tennessee.
Hmm. Coach, describe like because obviously you've been a head coach of some great programs, and like you said, you go into Mississippi State, and you've talked a little bit when you were talking about Pitt, just building culture. What is your coaching philosophy? What's your how do you go about building that culture to get kids to believe, get the people around you to buy in, and to change someone who has historically not been successful into a successful team?
Well, the first thing I did in the first meeting, and usually, was ask the players what they did or felt they did the best.
Hmm.
And you got to understand what can they do, what did they do the best, and it wasn't any hesitation. They just came back, said kickoff, punt returns,
Hmm.
and they had a young man that led the nation in kickoff and punt returns. So you gave them something to hang their hat on and to start and build. And we won a lot of games in the kicking game because
Hmm.
they believed. So you start with something that they believe in and build everything else around it. But there's four, I call it the four P's. And of a head coach, your job is to practice the players. And that's one thing, if you go back years ago to, Coach Bryant, you can say Saban. If you'd ever been to Saban's practice, they practice. The
Hmm.
players practice. And so you have to practice the players harder than the game. And Coach Bryant really believed that because if you didn't, you wasn't going to win the game you're supposed to, or
Hmm.
one that the team is equal or better than you. And two, you have to put the players in the right position,
Hmm.
you know, and then you have to prepare the players. The teams that are prepared are usually the teams that can win because today most teams are equal. I mean, you may have one team that's much better, but most teams are equal. So if you practice them, you prepare them, but you have to put them in the right positions. And
Hmm.
there's three players that I have that were defensive players. One was a linebacker, uh, Russ Grimm, when I recruited him. Jimbo Covert was a defensive lineman, and Richmond Webb at A&M. But I moved them all to offensive line. And, two of them are in the Hall of Fame, and Richmond Webb will be in the Hall of Fame. So Johnny Holland, the young man we beat Oklahoma on in recruiting as a quarterback. And we're in drills one day, and I put him in a linebacker drill, and that's where he stayed. He had a great career with Green Bay. He's linebacker coach for the 49ers now. So you have to put the players in the right position. If a player's a player, find him a place to play.
Hmm.
And then the most important, if you do the first three, then the other ones perform. And you get out of the way and let the players perform.
Hmm.
But you don't
Thank
win
you.
the game; they do.
Hmm.
Coach, I know you spent. Go ahead.
No, go ahead,
And
Dad. Huh.
go back to the greatest basketball coach uh, at UCLA, John Wooden. You never saw him come off the bench and say a word to a player. Now, Coach Bryant never said anything on Saturday either, rarely. But Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, yeah, there were a lot of things said, but not on
I
Saturday.
remember Coach Majors always said that: coach them hard on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Let them play on Saturday.
Yeah.
That's for sure. Coach, in your time at Mississippi, what were your thoughts on the JUCO system? I know I spent 10 years as a head coach at East Central. Was the JUCO system something you liked?
Oh, best recruiting uh, year we had. We took, I think, 17 kids out of junior college.
Hmm.
And those 17 kids took us to the SEC championship. Uh, you know, uh, and even today, when especially in Mississippi or Kansas, where you have great junior college football teams, uh, recruiting those kids is kind of like trying to find a transfer today. I mean,
Hmm.
there's a lot of kids. Plus, the young man that sued the NCAA and won, junior colleges don't count. So kids there, they still have 4 years to play for you. So you tell me that they're not better, but some of the great players that we got out of junior college, one was Fred Smoot, and
Oh,
and
yeah.
the other one was Bean. So we had Fred Smoot and Bean as corners. Uh, and so we had two shutdown corners that certainly could play, and they had a great career in pro ball, especially Fred. We're playing
So,
Vanderbilt, uh, and Vanderbilt's having a great year. Uh, the student newspaper, whoever the student that wrote the article, and it was intellects versus dummies. So I didn't have to say anything that week. I just put the article on the board. And so before the game, I had T-shirts made up with intellect versus dummies in their lockers for them to wear under their shoulder pads. And Fred lines up. Vanderbilt had a great receiver. He was one of the leaders in the SEC. And the very first play, Fred lined up and he says, "I'll let you catch a pass if you'll do my homework." I had no idea what Fred was saying. And every time he broke up a pass, he said, "I told you I'll let you if you do my homework, I'll let you catch a pass." So I don't think the kid caught but one pass that day.
That's a good story.
hey guys, I hope you're enjoying the podcast today. Austin, I would like to thank each of you for taking time out of your week to listen to our podcast, Awaken Kingdom Culture. This past year has been truly amazing. The conversations that Austin and I have been able to share as a father and son, the new relationships that we have made throughout this past year, and the ability to share other people's stories have been life-changing. Each week, I continue to be reminded of the value and impact one story can have. As a listener-supported podcast, I'm grateful for all of you who have partnered with us this past year. If this podcast has spoken to your heart and you'd like to see it continue to awaken other hearts and minds, then I'd like to invite you to become a teammate. If you'd like to partner with Win Awakening as well as our podcast, you can give at winawakening.org. And please spread the word about our ministry to all of your friends. Don't forget to follow, like, and subscribe to Awaken Kingdom Culture, Spotify, and YouTube channels. To listen to and watch our podcast weekly, every Wednesday at 9 a.m. Eastern. If you'd like to follow my socials as well and hear about the upcoming podcast news, watch the latest clips, and get an inside look at my life behind the scenes, then follow Ken Karcher on Facebook and X and KP Karcher on Instagram. I encourage you to subscribe to our mailing list and to partner with us as we continue to awaken hearts and minds one story at a time. Now, let's get back to the podcast.
Well, Coach, thank you for your time. Obviously, you're one of the greats in this profession, and for your willingness to share your heart and your story with us is truly humbling. I sit and, anytime we listen to a story, I try to do probably more listening than anything. And, what I'm thankful for is, whether the people that were around you that you've gleaned from, or your just experience, or, the ups and downs of your life and career. I mean, you're a very wise person, and I'm so thankful for you taking the time to share with, our listeners, which we hope that there's young coaches out there that sit there and listen to the way, because unfortunately, I'm a son of a coach, and so when you reach a certain age, sometimes they kind of push those coaches out the door, and I think that's foolish by our young generation, because there's so much wisdom and perspective and knowledge that you lose, and just like your little explanation about college football now, and trying to clean it up a little bit. I mean, I hope they listen to what you're saying. And the job of a coach is connected to growth. And I think one, as us as coaches, we're growing too. So, you are reaching really your pinnacle of your growth. You're continuing to grow into the best version of yourself. And that's our job as coaches. And like you were saying about development and the lack of development now, I mean, unfortunately, we're looking for quick fixes, but when you look for quick fixes, you miss on really what we're here on this earth for, is to step into people's growth process and to walk alongside them, draw the best out of them, put them in the right position, encourage them along the way, push them. You were talking about not being liked, and that's not your focus, because you had such an eternal vision of understanding my role as a coach is to draw the best out of you. And I got to put you in situations and environments that challenge you. And growth hurts and it's painful. And a role of a coach is to be willing to step in there and not be liked for a time, but have an eternal vision that you'll come back and you'll see the value in what you've done. And just the way you've communicated how Bear Bryant did that as a coach, and then the way you did it as a coach. I mean, that's what I've come to believe, and respect for those coaches who had eternal vision as opposed to just trying to be my best friend in the moment. I'm thankful for your heart and your time and how you love people along the way, and just how you've impacted the game and made it so much better.
Well, Coach, as I close us up, again, I mentioned this earlier, but I think back, it seems like it was yesterday. You standing in my home and my mom saying, "I'll never forget Coach Sherrill. He had that tie on, that yellow sport coat for Pitt football." And, but what I've always watched from a distance, not having the chance to play for you, but you've always been a professional. You've been first class. You're a respecter of the game, which to me means so much. And then, Coach, I got to tell you, it meant a lot to me because, again, I didn't play for you. And when I asked you to be a guest on our podcast and you said yes, that to me sums up who Jackie Sherrill is. And the influence and impact that you have had over the years as a coach of players and coaches, and even those that have never worked for you or played for you, has been tremendous. So I just want to thank you on behalf of Austin and I for allowing us to have you as a guest to share your story with our listeners on Awaken Kingdom Culture, where hearts and minds come alive, one story at a time.